The briefing starts at 4:30 a.m. sharp, inside a fluorescent-lit training room off Highway 77. Deputies stand shoulder to shoulder with ICE enforcement and removal operations officers from the Tampa field office. A supervisory detention and deportation officer walks the room through the morning's assignments. Each team gets a folder. Each folder holds 3 to 5 targets. The addresses stretch across Bay County, Panama City, Lynn Haven, Callaway, Springfield, and the unincorporated stretches near Southport. This is a joint operation. That distinction matters more than it sounds. Under a program called 287G, named for the section of the Immigration and Nationality Act that authorizes it, local law enforcement can be deputized to perform specific immigration functions that would otherwise belong only to federal agents. By the summer of 2025, more than 60 Florida sheriff's offices had signed these agreements. Bay County was one of them. The deputies in that briefing room aren't just providing backup.
Some of them are trained, on paper, to identify and process people for removal themselves. The question hanging over the whole operation is simple. How did 55 names end up on a single list? The answer starts weeks earlier. ICEERO builds what it calls target packages, dossiers pulled from prior removal orders, overstayed visas flagged in federal databases, and fingerprints collected during earlier bookings at the county jail. Those prints run through the Federal Secure Communities system, which checks every jail booking against Department of Homeland Security records. When a match comes back, ICE can issue a detainer. Bay County honors every one. Consider how a single name climbs onto that list. A man is pulled over for a broken taillight in 2022. He's booked, fingerprinted, released the next morning after paying a fine. He thinks nothing of it. But those prints don't disappear when he walks out the door. They sit in a database, matched against federal records, waiting. 3 years later, that traffic stop is why 2 officers are standing on his porch before sunrise. Every contact with law enforcement, however minor, becomes a thread that can be pulled later. That's the machinery. Now, watch it move. The vehicles roll out at 4:52 a.m. in staggered waves, so the convoy doesn't draw attention on the pre-dawn streets. One cluster heads east toward Callaway. Another pushes into the mobile home communities off Transmitter Road. A third sets up near an apartment complex on East 15th Street, where 4 separate targets share the same block. The plan is to hit as many addresses as possible before 6:30, when the first shifts start at the seafood processors, the construction sites, and the roofing crews still rebuilding from the last hurricane. That timing isn't arbitrary. It's built around the rhythm of working life. At the first address, a duplex in Springfield, the knock comes at 5:09 a.m. A man named in the folder as a prior deportee steps onto the porch in a t-shirt and work boots, already dressed for a job he won't make it to. 2 officers confirm his identity against the photograph. Within 4 minutes, he's in the back of a transport van, wrists zip-tied, and the team is pulling out toward the next address. Not every stop goes that cleanly. At a house on the west side of Panama City, the target isn't home, but someone else is. A relative, undocumented, whose name never appeared on any folder. Under the rules of the operation, that person becomes what ICE calls a collateral arrest. Someone encountered during enforcement who turns out to be removable, even though they were never the objective. Roughly a third of the morning's arrests will be collateral. That number becomes a flashpoint later. A scene repeats in variations across the county that morning. A door opens a crack. A woman stands behind it in a bathrobe, a child half asleep on her hip. She's asked whether the man on the folder lives there. She says he moved out months ago. The officers ask if they can confirm that. She hesitates, and in that hesitation, more questions follow. Where is she from? Does she have papers? What starts as a search for one name turns into an interview about everyone standing in the room.
A list of 55 targets can produce arrests the list never named. The operation's boundaries aren't the boundaries of the folder. They're the boundaries of who happens to answer the door.
Why involve local deputies at all, instead of leaving immigration to the feds? Capacity. The Tampa ERO field office covers a huge stretch of the Gulf Coast with a limited roster of officers. A single-day, multi-address sweep this size only works when deputies who know the county's streets, its rental complexes, its back roads, ride along and multiply the manpower. Without the sheriff's office, this operation doesn't happen. That's the whole point of 287G. By 6 a.m., the count is climbing. 12 in custody, then 19. Transport vans shuttle between the field and a staging point, unload, and return for the next wave. Each detainee is photographed, identified, logged into the system that will decide what happens to them next. Here's where the machinery starts to strain. 55 arrests in a few hours means 55 case files, and each one has to be processed before anyone moves into longer-term federal custody. Bay County's jail wasn't built as an immigration detention center.
It's a county facility with a fixed number of beds, and now it's absorbing a surge of federal detainees who have to be kept separate, tracked separately, and eventually transferred out. The county holds them under detainer authority. It can't hold them forever. The bottleneck is the same one that constrains ICE nationwide: detention space. Florida, in 2025, became the center of a detention build-out unlike anything in recent memory. The state opened a facility in the Everglades that officials nicknamed for the alligators surrounding it, a rapid construction site meant to hold thousands. Other counties expanded their contracts with ICE to house detainees for a daily per-bed rate, turning immigration detention into a line item on local budgets. For a sheriff's office, honoring detainers isn't only a policy choice, it can be a revenue stream. Follow the money, and the incentives get clearer. Under an intergovernmental service agreement, a county can bill ICE for every detainee it houses per night. Multiply a daily rate by 55 people, by the days it takes to arrange transfers, and the arithmetic starts to matter. None of that is hidden. It's written into the contracts. But it reframes the question of why a rural Gulf Coast county would build this much enforcement infrastructure in the first place. It also changes the calculus of the department itself. A jail that once budgeted around local arrests now has a federal customer with a steady appetite for beds. That revenue can fund overtime, equipment, staffing, the very resources that make the next sweep possible. Once a county has built the capacity, trained the deputies, and grown dependent on the reimbursement, letting it sit idle starts to look like leaving money on the table. Back to the morning of the sweep. By 7:30 a.m., the field teams are winding down. The last folders are cleared. A supervisor tallies the count. 55 individuals in custody, spanning at least 8 nationalities, arrested across more than 3 dozen addresses. Some had final orders of removal issued years earlier and never enforced. Some had pending immigration cases. Some, the collateral arrests, had no case at all until that morning. Among them is a landscaper who has lived in Bay County for 11 years. He has 2 children who are U.S. citizens, both born at a Panama City hospital. He wasn't the target at his address. His brother was. His brother wasn't home. He was. That's the part the folders don't capture. The math of who's standing in the kitchen at 5 a.m. You might wonder how any of this is legal, whether local deputies can simply arrest someone on immigration grounds. The line is narrow and contested. A 287G agreement authorizes trained deputies to perform specific, delegated immigration functions under ICE supervision. It doesn't turn every deputy into an immigration agent, and it doesn't, on its own, let local officers make freelance immigration arrests. That distinction is exactly what advocacy groups and civil rights attorneys spend years litigating. And litigate they do. Within days of the sweep, immigrant advocacy organizations start filing records requests, demanding to know how the target list was assembled, how many arrests were collateral, and whether anyone was detained without proper authority. They point to a recurring problem in these operations: detainers issued on mistaken identity or on people whose immigration status is more complicated than a database flag suggests. The federal government has, over the years, paid settlements to U.S. citizens wrongly held on ICE detainers. Not many, but enough to prove the risk is real. The county's position is simple. It executed a lawful operation under a signed federal agreement, honored valid detainers, and processed detainees for transfer to ICE custody. Every arrest, the office maintains, was backed by federal authority. Both of those things can be true at once. An operation can be lawful and still sweep up someone whose only offense was being related to the person on the list. The system worked exactly the way it was designed to work. That's precisely what its critics are afraid of. That's the one call I'll make in this whole story. The detainees don't stay in Bay County long. Over the following days, ICE arranges transfers. Some go to the Chrome Detention Center near Miami. Others go to facilities in Louisiana and Georgia, part of the interior network where immigration cases grind through months of hearings. A few, those with existing final orders, are staged for removal flights within weeks. The distance from a Springfield porch at 5:09 a.m. to a deportation flight is shorter than most people imagine. The transfers are their own quiet ordeal. A detainee picked up in Panama City might be bused 400 miles to a facility in rural Louisiana, far from any attorney who knows his case, far from the family who could post his bond, far from the courthouse where his community ties actually mean something. Phone calls cost money loaded onto an account someone on the outside has to fund. A wife trying to find her husband may spend days working through a detainee locator system, calling facility after facility before she learns which state he's in. For anyone trying to fight a case, distance is one of the hardest parts. For the landscaper with 2 citizen children, the process is slower. His attorney files for a bond hearing, arguing he has no criminal record, deep community ties, and over a decade of continuous residence. Whether he gets to stay depends on a judge in an immigration court backlogged by more than 3 million pending cases nationwide. He waits in detention while the calendar decides. 3 million cases. That's not a typo. That's the backlog one man's file is now sitting inside. That backlog is the quiet engine behind everything. Immigration courts are so overwhelmed that even when someone has a plausible claim to stay, the wait for a hearing can stretch into years. Detention during that wait is expensive, which is exactly why the bed space math matters, and why operations like this one create pressure that ripples all the way up to the federal budget. Every arrest adds a case. Every case needs a bed and a hearing. The system feeds its own bottleneck. Which brings us back to the folder on the hood of that Tahoe. 55 names, printed hours before dawn. Each name represented a decision made weeks earlier in an office in Tampa. A database match, a detainer, a target package. By the time the vehicles rolled out, the outcome was already largely written. The knocks on the doors, the zip ties, the transport vans were just the physical execution of choices made long before anyone woke up. So what happened to everyone? Here's the honest answer. Most of the 55 were transferred into ICE custody and entered removal proceedings. A portion with prior orders were removed relatively quickly. Others, like the landscaper, contested their cases and stayed in detention or were released on bond to fight in court. The advocacy groups got some of their records, litigated over the rest,
and used the collateral arrest numbers to argue the sweep reached further than its stated targets. The county kept its 287G agreement. The partnership continued.
And another sweep would come. That's the part that rarely makes the news, not the single dramatic morning, but the routine of it. This wasn't a one-time event. It was a repeatable process, scheduled and refined, one operation among many across a state that leaned harder into local federal enforcement than almost anywhere else in the country. There's a detail worth sitting with: the choice to strike before 6:30 a.m., before the work shifts started. That timing tells you something the press releases don't. These operations are built around the assumption that the people on the list are working, getting up early, heading out to jobs on roofing crews and processing lines and construction sites. The 5 a.m. knock isn't just tactical. It's baked into the plan, an acknowledgement of exactly where these 55 people would otherwise have been going that day. And it changes the neighborhoods it touches in ways that outlast the morning. Word travels fast after a sweep. By the next dawn, some workers won't show up for their shifts. Some parents will keep their kids home. Some families will pack a single vehicle and leave the county entirely, choosing to disappear before the folder ever names them. Employers along the coast, the seafood plants, the framing crews, the landscaping outfits feel it too, in the empty spots on the schedule. The operation's reach isn't measured only in the 55 taken. It's measured in the far larger number who now change how they live because they know it can happen again. By 8 a.m., the parking lot behind the Bay County Sheriff's Office is nearly empty again. The vehicles are back. The folders are shredded or filed. The morning is over. Somewhere in a county jail cell, 55 people are waiting to learn which facility, which state, which flight comes next. And for some of them, whether they'll ever stand in their own kitchen at 5 a.m. again. The list is already being built for next time.